Hey, what's going on, APUSH peeps? We have chapter 19 of America's history for you today. Let's get going. All right, we're going to talk about the new metropolis or the emergence of these new cities. So let's focus on the shape of the industrial cities. Steam engines replaced water power in cities, and we see the emergence of a new mass transit system develop. Trolley cars, elevated railroads, and subways emerged in large cities. And we also see the emergence of skyscrapers. The first one appeared in Chicago. Then we see the Chicago School of Design, led by this guy, Louis Sullivan, which really focused on building new skyscrapers. And this allowed landowners to make money on small plots of land by building up. This is an important idea to understand that in cities, space is money, and oftentimes people would not be able to afford large amounts of land. So if you could buy a plot of land and build up, there is no tax on how high a building is or how far up it goes. So if you can build a building very high, you can do so on less land. And electricity begins to emerge in the later 19th century. A quote from the book says, "The light is as good as a policeman at night because people could see what was around the corner and where they were going, and this helped reduce crime." All right, key concept 6.1 and fun. Well, you have vaudeville theater, which would be this continuous play of music, skits, and magic shows. You had the emergence of Nickelodeons, which were movie theaters that only cost 5 cents. If you're ever wondering where Nickelodeon got its name from, now you know. Amusement parks began to develop. The first one, Coney Island in New York, which inspired other amusement parks throughout the country. Chances are where you're living, there is an amusement park near you. If you live in Cincinnati, the great amusement park of Kings Island is there. Check it out if you were ever there. Let's go back to Coney Island really quick. They served hot dogs there, which inspired the Coney hot dog. Now, speaking of Cincinnati, if you ever go there, you have to go to Skyline Chili and eat a cheese coney. It is delicious. It's a hot dog. It's got chili on it. You got to get mustard and onions, and then they put like just shredded cheese on top. My mouth is watering just think about it. It is oh so delicious. Doesn't that look amazing? Don't you just want to devour that coney right now? New types of music begin to develop. We have ragtime, which is popular among all classes and races. This was introduced at the Chicago's World Fair in 1893. If you were looking for a good book to read, I'm going to give you 4 books this chapter that you can read. One of the better books I've read in a long time is called Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. It is the true story of the Chicago's World Fair in 1893. And he writes about a serial killer and how he builds this enormous apartment building, and it is just absolutely amazing. Check it out from a library. It's about 380 pages. You will not regret it. Very, very good. Very suspenseful. Everything in there is true. And it is written very well. It is a page turner, I promise. Blues, the new music, began to appeal to individuals in cities, and it spoke of hard work and heartache. Dating becomes more acceptable in large cities without chaperones, and men often paid for women on dates since women had little money. They earned less wages, sometimes as little as half, as their male counterparts. And New York City had a large gay population during this time, and we will come back to that in one of the later chapters, probably chapter 29 or 30, when we focus on the 1969 Stonewall riots. Doing a little foreshadowing for you. Okay, the rich helped promote museums, some out of a sense of civic duty. New York City's MoMA, or the Museum of Modern Art, opened in 1880. And Andrew Carnegie helped create over 1,000 libraries across the nation. And this is known as the Gospel of Wealth. He actually writes about this and titles it the Gospel of Wealth, not to be confused with the social gospel, which we talked about last chapter. What was the social gospel? Think about it. Yep, you got it. That is that Protestant church movement to improve society. The Gospel of Wealth is the idea, and here's Carnegie, that wealthy individuals should give their money to make society better. It's not necessarily just go up to poor people and start giving them money, but rather build institutions that would be long lasting. Yellow journalism. Absolutely know this. This is the sensationalizing and exaggerating news stories in order to sell newspapers. And this is a major cause of the Spanish-American War. And here's a very well-known political cartoon. You see on the left Pulitzer and on the right Hearst. And these are 2 competing newspaper men who really were looking to sell their newspapers. Here's book number 2 if you're looking for a good book on yellow journalism. It's called Murder of the Century by Paul Collins. It's about the late 1890s, a murder in New York City that goes unsolved for a while, and these 2 newspapers really emerge, and they are competing with each other and putting on putting up new headlines as a way to sell newspapers. So it's not the Spanish-American War that actually causes this newspaper rivalry. It's this murder for murder of the century. Excellent book, very well written. It's about 250 pages. You'll love it, I promise. Muckrakers, we'll come back to when we get to the progressive unit in chapter 20, I believe. This was a term coined by Teddy Roosevelt to describe the journalists that expose corruption and problems of society. We'll actually talk about a few muckrakers in just a moment. Okay, The Shame of Cities. Here's one of these muckrakers by Lincoln Steffens. He wrote about the corruption between municipal, which means city governments, and big businesses. So key concept 6.2, Roman numeral 2, letter D says, in an urban atmosphere where the access to power was unequally distributed, political machines provided social services in exchange for political support, settlement houses helped immigrants adapt to the new language and customs, and women's clubs and self-help groups targeted intellectual development and social and political reform. So with the development of urban machines, I do have a video on political machines. Check it out in the description below. Many utilities were provided by private businesses, not the city government. So we see the emergence of political machines, most notably Tammany Hall in New York City. And they controlled many aspects of city government. They would provide jobs, food, money, etc. to constituents in exchange for votes and support. And they really appealed to immigrants who were poor and had nowhere else to turn to. So one of the leaders of Tammany Hall was George Washington Plunkett, and he favored what was known as honest graft. In other words, if he had inside information that the city was going to buy land, he may go and buy that land before the city and then turn around and sell it at a very high price. He said there was nothing wrong with that. That's having inside information, using it to your knowledge, and improving from it. Now, on the opposite end is another Tammany leader, Boss Tweed, who favored dishonest graft. And this is bribery, this is taking bribes and doing other illegal activities. He stole over $200 million from New York City, and he was later caught in Cuba due to the cartoonist Thomas Nast. Thomas Nast was this incredibly well-known political cartoonist. I'm sure you've seen many of his cartoons. Here's one of them here. Now you can say you've seen one. And he would constantly draw political cartoons about Boss Tweed and how corrupt he was. And Boss Tweed fled to Cuba, and he was actually caught because somebody recognized him through Thomas Nast's cartoons. That's pretty sweet if you ask me. So mayors, Quincy and Boston in particular, began to build public pools, gyms, playgrounds, and other spaces that competed with these political machines. And they also fought to lower fares on streetcars. So we see politicians begin to fight for their constituents as well. Okay, let's focus on key concept 6.1. Roman numeral 1, letter D. As cities grew substantially in both size and number, some segments of American society enjoyed lives of extravagant, conspicuous consumption, while many others lived in relative poverty. How the Other Half Lives, absolutely positively knows, is by Jacob Riis. Here is Jacob Riis. He is a Danish-born photographer. He helped expose the plight of the poor in tenement houses in New York City. He was good buddies with Police Chief Teddy Roosevelt. If you're looking for a good book on that, it's called Island of Vice by Richard Zacks, and it is entirely about Teddy Roosevelt being police chief of New York City. It's very good. It talks about Teddy and Jacob Riis walking through New York City at midnight, trying to get rid of a lot of crime in New York City. Very good book. Highly recommend it. Very specific, though. It's not about Teddy's presidency. It's only about Teddy as police chief. So disease spread through cities quickly. You had cholera, typhoid fever, and a lot of this led to a clean water initiative throughout major cities. New sewage and drainage systems were established in large cities. You also had the City Beautiful movement, and this sought to increase the number of park spaces available. So the closing of the red light districts becomes an initiative in many cities, and reasons that women entered into prostitution during this time included low-paying jobs, hard economic times, abuse, etc. Many people, many reformers, wanted to end brothels and other forms of prostitution. The Mann Act is passed by Congress, which made it illegal to transport prostitutes across state lines. Key concept 6.3, Roman numeral 2, letter C, challenging their prescribed place, women and African American activists articulate alternative visions of political, social, and economic equality. We talked about this last chapter. We're going to continue with this one. So we have The Hull House by Jane Addams, founded in Chicago, Illinois in 1889. This is the most famous example of a settlement house, which is a house for poor and immigrants and others to come to and try to improve their lives. There is Jane Addams. There is the Hull House that she founded. She helped poor women, immigrants, and children adjust to city life. They provided a bathhouse, a daycare, etc., other opportunities for these poor and immigrants that were not available to them. This helped inspire other settlement houses throughout the country, and they became an instrumental in social work and the progressive movement, which again we'll come back to in the next chapter. Margaret Sanger, here she is, be familiar with her. She advocated birth control, which was illegal in many areas at the time, and she will be very popular in the 1920s as well. Upton Sinclair, the Jungle. He is perhaps the most well-known muckraker. I told you we'd come back to muckrakers. His book helped inspire the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act. And here are a bunch of meat inspectors in a factory. He wrote this book about factory life in the meatpacking industry, and he really wrote about how bad it was for a lot of the workers, but the public really focused on the unsanitary conditions. The National Consumers League, or the NCL, was led by Florence Kelley, who used to work at the Hull House, and this advocated laws to protect workers. On March 25th, 1911, you had the worst workplace disaster in New York City history up until 9/11, and 146 employees died at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, and the average age was 19, and many of these girls were immigrants. Alfred Smith, who was a New York state legislature and a future presidential candidate, he established a commission to investigate the disaster. He actually is the first person on a major party platform, he's a Democrat, to run as a Catholic. And this helped inspire many new workplace laws. Frances Perkins, who was a student at Columbia University and saw this fire, there she is. She became the first woman appointed to a presidential cabinet under FDR. She was inspired by this and really became a reformer after seeing this. If you were looking for a good book, this perhaps may be the best book out of all that I've listed today. It is called Triangle by David Von Drale, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. It is about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. It also talks about the labor movement during this time. Lots of stuff related to AP in there. It is an excellent, excellent book. Highly recommend you check it out. Come to think of it, I don't know where mine is. I think I gave it to a student and never got it back. I'm not sure, but look at me. I'm like Carnegie here with the Gospel of Wealth. I'm giving out libraries left and right. All right, let's do a quick recap for Chapter 19. Definitely know tenement houses, and Jacob Riis photographed them with how the other half lives. Immigrants tended to live in similar communities. Yellow journalism, which is the exaggeration of stories in order to sell newspapers, and that was a cause of the Spanish-American War, which we will get to in the next chapter, I believe. Muckrakers were people that exposed corruption. Political machines and Boss Tweed, absolutely know them. Settlement houses, definitely know Jane Addams and the Hull House, very, very important. The Jungle, the book, what was it about and what were its effects? There's two laws that you should be familiar with. And Frances Perkins was a very important reformer who goes on to be the first woman appointed to a cabinet position. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. This is a sneak peek at the next chapter. Last chapter, I introduced you to Booker T. Washington. I mentioned another civil rights leader. Here he is that we will talk about in the next chapter. I look forward to seeing you right back here for Chapter 20. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the section below. Best of luck on all your tests. And thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. Have a good day.